Happy Thursday! It's Miss Shannon, and I'm here to read part 2 of chapter 3 of The Wishing Spell. The walk home that day was very quiet. Alice could sense that her brother's presentation had left him a little tense. She tried breaking the silence every few steps with supportive comments, or at least she thought they were supportive. "I thought you made a good point," she said sweetly. "Granted, it's not a point I ever would have made." "Thanks," Connor replied. She wasn't helping. "You may have overanalyzed it, though," Alex said. "I do it all the time. Sometimes I read a story and interpret it the way I want to, rather than the way the author wanted me to. It just takes practice." He didn't respond. She still wasn't helping. "Well, it's our birthday today," Alex reminded him. "Are you excited to be 12? "Not really," Connor admitted. "It feels just like 11. But aren't we supposed to be getting a new set of molars soon?" "Come on, let's be positive," Alex insisted. "Even though we aren't doing anything exciting for our birthday, we should stay optimistic. There are plenty of things to look forward to. One more year until we'll be teenagers." "I suppose," Connor said. "Only 4 more years left until we can drive." "And 6 years left until we can vote and go to college," Alex added. That was all they could come up with. Their cheerfulness was hollow, and they both knew it, so they just stayed silent for the remainder of the walk. Even if they had the most extravagant party in the world waiting for them at home, birthdays were always going to be hard for them. School had been predictable. The walk home had been typical. The whole day had seemed normal. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary to make their birthday feel special at all, until they got home and saw a bright blue car pull into their driveway. "Grandma," the twins said in perfect unison. "Surprise!" yelled their grandma, getting out of her car. She was so loud the entire neighborhood could hear her. The twins ran up to her with huge smiles on their faces. They only saw their grandma a couple times a year, and they were stunned to see her in their driveway with no prior warning. Their grandmother hugged both of them so tight they thought they'd pop. "Look at you two," she said. "You both look like you've grown a foot since the last time I saw you." Their grandmother was a petite woman with long graying brown hair that was pulled back in a tight braid. She had the warmest smile and the kindest eyes in the world, which wrinkled pleasantly when she smiled, just like the twins' dad's eyes had. She was cheerful and energetic, exactly what the kids needed. She always wore bright dresses and her signature shoes with white laces and brown heels. She was never more than a few feet away from her large green travel bag and blue purse. And although their grandfather had died many years before, she always wore her wedding ring. "We had no idea you were coming," Connor said. "It wouldn't be a surprise if you knew I was coming," Grandma said. "What are you doing here, Grandma?" Alex asked. "Your mom called and asked me to stay with you a while she worked." "Your mom called and asked me to stay with you while she went to work," Grandma told them. "I couldn't let you spend your birthday alone, could I? Thank goodness I was in the country." Their grandmother was retired and spent most of the year traveling around the world with other retired friends. They traveled to mostly third world countries and read to sick children in hospitals and taught other children of the communities to read and write. "Come help me with the groceries," Grandma told the twins. She opened her trunk and the twins began unloading bags and bags filled with food into the house. It was enough food to last them for weeks. Mrs. Bailey was sitting at the kitchen table going through another stack of mail with bright red warning labels on them. She quickly pushed them to the side when the twins and their grandmother paraded into the kitchen with all the groceries. "What's all this?" Mrs. Bailey asked. "Oh, hello, dear," Grandma said to her. "I'm planning on cooking the twins a huge birthday dinner and wasn't sure what you had in the house, so I went to the store and picked up a couple of things." Their grandmother always had a talent for sugarcoating the truth. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble," Mrs. Bailey said, shaking her head unprepared for the kind gesture. "It wasn't any trouble at all," Grandma said with a small but reassuring smile. "Alex, Connor, how about you go get your birthday presents from the front seat of my car, and I'll catch up with your mom for a second. But don't open them until tonight." They happily did as she was asked. Presents was a word that had been absent from their vocabulary for a long time. "See, I told you," Alex said to Connor on their way to the grandmother's car. "Optimism always pays off." Yeah, Connor said. Half a dozen wrapped presents with bright bows, Each marched to one of them, were waiting in the front seat of the car. The twins returned inside with their gifts. Their grandmother and mother were still having a conversation that they most likely weren't supposed to hear. "Things are still tough," Mrs. Bailey said. "Even after selling the bookstore, the house foreclosed, and we still have some debt and things unpaid from the funeral. But we're making it somehow. In a few more months, we'll be back on our feet." Grandma took Mrs. Bailey's hands into her own. "If you need anything, dear, I mean anything, you know where to find me," she said. "You've already helped so much," Mrs. Bailey told her. "I don't know where we'd be if it weren't for you. I couldn't ever ask you for anything else." "You're not asking, I'm offering," Grandma assured. The twins knew if they eavesdropped any longer, they'd be caught, so they walked back into the kitchen with their presents. "Well, I have to go back to work," Mrs. Bailey said, and kissed both of the twins on top of their heads. "Have a great night, you guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Save some celebration for me." She gathered her things and mouthed a meaningful thank you to their grandmother on their way out. Grandma put her things away in the guest bedroom and returned to the kitchen, where she found the stack of bills Mrs. Bailey had put aside. She plopped the mail into her own purse with a smile, and that was that. Grandma loved helping people, especially if it was against their will. "Let's get started on dinner, shall we?" Grandma said, clapping her hands. Alex and Connor sat at the table and visited with their grandmother while she cooked up a storm. She told them all about her recent trips, the difficulties she and her friends experienced getting into and out of places, and all the interesting people she had met along the way. "I've never met a person I didn't learn something from. Even the most monotonous people will surprise you. Remember that." She was cooking so many different things it was impossible to tell which ingredient was going where. Everything she did was so fast, and she used almost every pan and dish they had. With every second that passed, the twins' stomach growled louder and louder, and their mouths salivated more and more. Finally, after a few hours of aroma-teasing torture, they ate. Alex and Connor had become so accustomed to frozen dinners and takeout, they'd forgotten how good food could taste. There were plates of mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese, oven-roasted chicken with carrots and peas, and freshly baked rolls. Their kitchen table looked like the cover of a cookbook. Just when they thought they possibly couldn't eat any more, their grandmother pulled out a huge birthday cake out of the oven. The twins were amazed. They hadn't even realized she had been baking one. She sang happy birthday, and the twins blew out the candles. "Now open your presents," Grandma said. "I've been collecting for you all year." They opened their boxes and were flooded with knickknacks from all countries their grandma had been to. Alex was given copies of her favorite books in other languages. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in French, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in German, and Little Woman in Dutch. Connor got a pile of candies and tacky t-shirts that said things like, "My crazy grandma traveled to India and all I got was this lousy t-shirt." They both received several figurines of famous structures like the Eiffel Tower and Leaning Tower of Pisa and the Taj Mahal. "It's crazy to think that places like this actually exist in the world," Alex said, holding the Eiffel Tower in her hand. "You'd be amazed to know what it's like, what's out there just waiting to be discovered," their grandma said with a smile and a twinkle in her eye. A day with very low expectations had turned into one of the best birthdays they'd ever had. As the night grew later, their visit with their grandmother began to come to a bittersweet end. Since their dad had died, they had never saw their grandmother for more than a day at a time, and there were always a few months between each visit. She was always so busy with her travels. "When do you leave?" Alex asked her grandmother. "Tomorrow," she said, "as soon as I take you to school." The twins' postures sank a bit. "What's the matter?" asked their grandmother, sensing their spirits sink. "We just wish you could stay longer, Grandma, that's all," Connor said. "We really miss you when you're gone," Alex added. "Things are so gloomy here without Dad, but you make everything seem like it's going to be okay." Their grandmother's constant smile faded slightly, and her gaze drifted off toward the window. She stared blankly into the night sky and took a deep breath. "Oh, kiddos, if I could spend every day with you, I would," Grandma said longingly, perhaps more disheartened than she intended to show. "But sometimes life hands us certain responsibilities, not because we want them, but because we were meant to have them, and it's our duty to see to them. All I can ever think about is how much I miss you two and your dad when I'm away." It was hard for Alex and Connor to understand. Did she not want to travel as much as she did? Their grandmother looked back at them. Her eyes were bright with a new idea. I almost forgot. I have one more gift for you, Grandma said, and jumped up and skipped into the next room. She returned carrying a large old book with dark emerald cover titled The Land of Stories in gold writing. Alex and Connor knew what that book was as soon as they saw it. If their childhood could be symbolized by an object, it was this book. It's your old storybook, Alex proclaimed. I haven't seen that in years. Their grandmother nodded. It's very old and has been with our family for a long time, Grandma told them. I take it with me everywhere I go and read it to the children in other countries. But now I want you two to have it. The twins were shocked by the gesture. What? Connor asked. We can't take your book, Grandma. That's the Land of Stories. It's your book. It's always been so important to you. Their grandmother opened the book and flipped through the pages, the entire room filled with its musty paper aroma. That's very true, said Grandma. This book and I have spent a lot of time together over the years, but the best times were when I read it to you. So I'd like to pass it down to you now. I don't need it anymore. I have all the stories memorized anyway. She handed it to them. Alex hesitated, but finally accepted the book from her grandmother. It didn't feel right to take it. It was like receiving an heirloom from a relative who was still alive. Whenever you're feeling down on the days you miss your dad the most, or when you just wish I was here, all you have to do is open it up, and we'll all be together in spirit, reading along, Grandma told them. Now, it's getting late, and you have school tomorrow. Let's get ready for bed. They did as she was asked, even though they were too old for it. Their grandmother insisted on tucking them into their beds like old times. Alex took the Land of Stories with her to bed that night. She gently flipped through the old pages, careful not to tear them. Seeing all the colorful illustrations of the places and characters again made her feel like she was reading an old scrapbook of sorts. She loved spending time reading about fairy tale creatures more than anything. They'd always felt so real and accessible to her. They were the best friends she ever had. I wish we got to choose which world we lived in, Alex said, running her fingers over the illustrations. They were so inviting. In her hands was a world unlike the one she lived in. It was a world unaltered by political corruption or technology. A world where good things came to good people, and a world she wanted to be a part of with all her being. Alex imagined what it would be like to be a character in her own fairy tale, the forest she'd run through, the castles she'd live in, and the creatures she'd befriend. Eventually, Alex's eyelids began to feel heavy. She closed the Land of Stories, placed it on her nightstand, clicked off her lamp, and began to drift off to sleep. She was just about to fade into consciousness when she heard a funny noise. A low humming sound filled her room. What in the world? Alex said to herself, and opened her eyes to see what it was. She saw nothing. That's strange, she said. She closed her eyes once more and began to drift back to sleep. The humming noise began to buzz through the room again. Alex sat up and looked around her room and finally found what was making the noise. It was coming from inside the Land of Stories on her nightstand, and to her amazement, the pages were unmistakably glowing. That's the end of Chapter 3, and I'll be back tomorrow with Part 1 of Chapter 4. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.